Say yes.
Thank you so much to the city councilors, and I just want to start with something that I learned in my training, which is no patient cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So I would like to just introduce myself a little bit so you know who I am, because this is my first Naples City Council meeting. So I was a board-certified emergency physician for many, many years when COVID happened. And I was living in California at the time. I was living in Beverly Hills, and I was surrounded by so much lies and so much disinformation that I picked up and I moved to Naples, which is my forever permanent home. So I hope that although this is my first meeting, it will certainly not be my last meeting. And I'm delighted to be here. I've been here for about 2 years. Anyone who is living in Florida is benefiting from the organization that I founded, America's Frontline Doctors. We frontline doctors stepped up because of the lies and the disinformation. Some of you know me. Many of you also know my good friend and fellow early frontline doctor, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, our fine Surgeon General. Floridians have benefited greatly from his leadership. In addition to being a physician, though, I am also an attorney, a Stanford University educated attorney. I graduated from there. I spent most of my career doing emergency medicine, but I always had my interest and hand in policy work. And in leading America's Frontline Doctors, I do a lot of legal appellate work. For instance, this year I filed 2 Supreme Court cases on informed consent, which is essentially my legal specialty at this point. Fluoride is not a partisan issue. It is that the known facts have changed since fluoridation of water became commonplace. So let's just flip the script. Imagine that there was no fluoridation, and citizens started asking their city council to start adding fluoride. What would your decision be? In November of 2024, I dare say there is no city council anywhere in America that would start adding fluoride to the water. Why? Because the scientific evidence is overwhelming that fluoride is a neurotoxin. Just consider two sources that were in the case that the judge ruled on. The Federal Health and Human Services National Toxicology Program showed that 1 point IQ drop, etc. You've heard all this. JAMA, many studies have existed. It is not a good defense of a policy, merely that it is current policy. All policies must be defensible on their merits. If this city council would not begin to add fluoride now, that same risk exists whether you add it today, tomorrow, or 50 years ago. We now know that adding fluoride is a bad medical idea. But as a legal idea, it is even worse. The City Council has received actual notice that fluoridation violates several legal principles. First is the lack of informed consent to a medical treatment. Fluoride is certainly a medical treatment. You need a prescription to buy a much lower concentration than we are putting into the water. Here are the numbers. Over-the-counter toothpaste, the actual amount you get over a year is 36 milligrams per year. Prescription toothpaste, you end up with 146 milligrams per year ingested. Health and Human Services recommends a maximum of 0.7 mg per part per million. That would have ended up at 485 milligrams per year. Naples is actually higher. I looked at the 2023 numbers, and we're at 596 milligrams per year. In other words, by the math, municipal water contains 5 times the amount that a dentist prescribes to a minority of patients for a specific medical reason. That the city gave all its citizens a medication without informed consent in the past is not a legal defense in the future. The second legal risk is that a court has already made a legal finding that fluoride presents an unquote unreasonable risk of injury. The California District Court noted that the EPA itself has already conceded that fluoride poses a risk of lower IQ and all these neurotoxins, et cetera, but they also noted that the margin of safety is much too close to just be putting it out there in the drinking water. The Federal District Court has ordered the EPA to address this, quote, unreasonable risk. My professional opinion is that continued legal fluoridation poses a substantial legal risk to the city of Naples for 4 reasons. First, this ruling is a precedent, although it is not legally binding on Florida. Should this same issue be presented to a Florida courts will certainly deem that precedent relevant. Second is the evidence against fluoride was compelling. That same compelling evidence would also be presented to Florida courts. The third, and this is interesting, probably non-lawyers in the room won't know this, but the executive branch agencies are no longer being given unconstitutional judicial deference. I want to apologize. I lost my voice last night. And it's really, that's why you're hearing all that. In late June of 2024, the Supreme Court held in Loper Bright Enterprises that it is unconstitutional for courts to defer to non-elected bureaucrats. Until this ruling a few months ago, courts were giving tremendous deference to agencies, which often engage in egregious overreach at the expense of ordinary citizens. That means if the EPA was to appeal this, the agency is really no longer going to get a free pass. It'll have to convince the court on its merits. That's a very big change that's going to happen in our country going forward. Again, courts are no longer going to be able to just give judicial deference to executive branch agencies. That's also a brand new situation for our nation. So to summarize, the 7 medical and legal risks there are. 1, fluoride medical. 3, fluoride is a known neurotoxin at levels that the EPA has previously advised is safe. Fluoride is available to all people in over-the-counter toothpaste and also higher doses by prescription. 3, universal fluoridation is giving all persons a 5-time prescription strength medication. That's what we're doing right now. The legal risks are there's no informed consent to taking a large dose of a prescription medication. A federal judge has already held that this is an unreasonable risk. The Environmental Protection Agency has been ordered to regulate this, and the EPA will no longer enjoy judicial deference. So I want to say one other thing about outsourcing our thinking, because I read an op-ed in the Naples Daily News, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, recently, and I just want to comment on that. The op-ed said there was like a vague claim that the quoted studies were flawed, and the second is that other people think putting fluoridation in is a good idea. Let me just address those because I saw that wildly during COVID. I'm so sorry. What makes a study valid? Here's the short answer. Is it reproducible? Is it reproducible? We now have dozens and dozens of studies that have reproduced these studies. So I would say that that is a poor reason to say that they're not valid, which was in the op-ed. The second is this outsourcing to other agencies your own decision making. That other people think fluoridation is a good idea is a terrible reason. We are required to think for ourselves. One of my favorite quotes during the COVID years, as Henry David Thoreau says, think for yourself or others will think for you without thinking of you. Every medical organization that this author quoted did terribly and continues to do terribly. This author particularly quoted the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, and the CDC. Well, the AAP current position right now is that it's perfectly okay to cut off breasts, penises, and cause lifelong infertility. That's their position right now. So I'm really disinterested in outsourcing my thinking, and I would suggest any legislator's thinking, to an organization. We have to think for ourselves. And of course, this particular author also referenced the CDC. Don't even get me started on there, right? So if I was a city councilor, I would immediately stop fluoridation of the water for all of these 7 reasons. There's considerable evidence that it's a neurotoxin. We are giving people about 5 times the prescription dose strength. People can obtain fluoride easily in over-the-counter products if they want it. And the legal risk of lack of informed consent, the fact that the legal environment has changed such that the EPA is not going to get a free pass by an agency going forward, is a problem. The fact that a judge has already said it's an unreasonable risk will also be submitted. The only reason I can see to continue fluoridation is because it's what we've done for decades. But for me, all policies have to stand current muster. You can't do something just because it's been a legacy policy in the past. And I want to urge people city councilors specifically, not to outsource their own thinking. The Supreme Court in June of 2024 really held the courts really need to think for themselves. Well, the city council is essentially court in this matter, so you can't just defer to what another agency says. You have to hear everything, think for yourself. And I encourage people to keep in mind their actual job, which is to defend people's liberties, not to act like they're dentists. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker